For over 50 years, A&P has been the people's choice. Why? We sell what people want.
Once hailed as the titan of American grocery retail, A&P wasn't just a store, it was a symbol. From the corner of Main Street to the shelves of every household, it quietly became part of daily life. But somewhere between booming success and silent exits, something shifted. Was it just the rise of competitors? Or was there a deeper flaw baked into its DNA? A business that once outpaced Sears and defined shopping for generations is now barely a memory. How does an empire built on coffee, tea, and innovation crumble in plain sight? 1. Early decision may have changed everything. The story is complex, the fall unexpected, and the truth might surprise you. From leather to loose-leaf tea. Before A&P revolutionized the grocery industry, it began with a very different purpose rooted in industrial manufacturing. George Gilman, born into a successful leather tanning family in Manhattan, managed the family business through the 1850s. But after inheriting the enterprise upon his father's death in 1859, Gilman made a surprising shift. Rather than continuing in leather goods, he was drawn to the tea and coffee market, a business he saw as more refined, scalable, and increasingly in demand among urban consumers. This pivot marked the first key decision that would eventually lead to the creation of one of the largest retail chains in American history. Gilman's venture into retail began with the Great American Tea Company, which started as a wholesale operation selling tea to independent shopkeepers. However, he quickly saw potential in cutting out intermediaries and selling directly to the public. This was an unconventional model at the time, as most goods flowed through layers of middlemen. By moving to a direct-to-consumer approach, Gilman capitalized on both efficiency and consumer trust. He could control pricing and quality more tightly, giving urban shoppers reliable products at affordable rates. A novelty in an era of inconsistent retail standards. Gilman had early insight into urban retail logistics. His first retail stores in New York City opened in the early 1860s, with stores strategically located close to transportation and commercial centers. These shops operated with minimum inventory and a standardized product line, allowing A&P to grow at a much faster rate than traditional general stores. Gilman sold not only tea, but consistency and reliability. The streamlined model appealed to the working and middle class consumer who wanted reliable value without the hassle of a capricious local market. In a decisive moment in 1870, Gilman brought Huntington Hartford into the firm and changed the name to Great Atlantic and Pacific Tea Company. With Hartford's managerial knowledge and Gilman's onward vision, the growth of this company was on the fast track. The company gave emphasis to its basic commodities like tea and coffee, but created unusual and centralized methods of procurement, uniform pricing throughout its operating territories, and vigorous merchandising geared to the individual customer. A&P was becoming more than a store just selling hot drinks. It was turning into a milestone for retail modernization. What had begun as a family diversion from leather goods had now laid enough commercial groundwork in 10 years for the creation of a retail empire. Little did shoppers know, A&P was about to turn routine purchases into a revolutionary experience, reinventing retail. The early success of A&P wasn't just a matter of expanding store count. It was a redefinition of how retail could function in the United States. Long before supermarkets became the norm, A&P was establishing a unique model based on brand control, operational consistency, and consumer trust. One of its most radical departures from traditional retail was the use of branded, pre-packaged goods, something virtually unheard of in an era dominated by loose, unbranded staples. By offering products like its signature Thea Nectar tea in sealed packages, A&P gave customers both quality assurance and a recognizable product they could rely on. Where Gilman had laid the groundwork for vertical integration, it was during this next phase that A&P fully embraced the concept. By controlling roasting, blending, packaging, and distribution, A&P ensured not only uniform quality, but also significant cost savings that could be passed on to consumers. This level of control also made marketing easier. Consistency meant customers always knew what to expect, unlike fragmented mom-and-pop stores that relied on wholesalers. For supplies, A&P delivered a brand-centric experience, and that became a major competitive edge. The A&P supermarket was a forerunner in applying concepts of customer engagement in the early days. It wasn't merely about low prices, it was all about loyalty. The chain established early customer retention tools called premiums, whereby items like dishes and lithos were used to attract repeat purchases. These promotions made the shopping experience a fun event, instilling brand loyalty long before loyalty cards or e-coupons entered the consumer's mind. Today, A&P is synonymous with reliability and value-added services, not just low prices. Secondly, it considered how to grow nationally but maintain consistency. Between the finalized Transcontinental Railroad in the late 1860s, A&P expanded from urban storefronts to rural and frontier customers through one of the first effective mail-order systems. That enhanced A&P's stature, not only as a retailer, but also as a national brand serving a dispersed population. A&P was primarily engaged in selling tea and coffee, but was, at the same time, creating the framework for the national expansion of retailing, one that would make A&P the most dominant grocery chain in decades to follow. Expansion and dominance. By 1930, A&P had cemented itself as a powerhouse in American retail, operating more than 16,000 stores across the United States and parts of Canada. Its dominance was unprecedented. It captured 25% of the grocery market share in the regions where it operated and was responsible for roughly 1 in every 10 grocery dollars spent nationally, with annual sales reaching $2.9 billion. A&P dwarfed its competitors, standing at twice the size of Sears and 4 times larger than Kroger at the time. This was more than just retail success. It was a transformation of how Americans bought their food. A&P's rise was fueled by its innovative approach to operations and expansion. It pioneered vertical integration, controlling every aspect of its supply chain from sourcing to packaging to retail. This allowed A&P to keep prices low and quality high, undercutting smaller grocers and making it a go-to destination for budget-conscious families. The company's success wasn't just in scale, it was also in strategy. From launching its own branded products like Thea Nectar tea to leveraging national infrastructure such as the Transcontinental Railroad, A&P expanded rapidly and efficiently, outpacing rivals who couldn't match its reach or pricing power. The explosive growth sure can invite A&P grief. It's very rein-made competitors and independent. Businessmen alarmed, and then saw lawmakers eager to take action against any monopolistic Behavior being shown. Most of the people considered A&P's approaches of aggressive pricing and buying groceries in bulk unfair, which created intangible disadvantages for small grocers. This was, of course, the flip side of a growing political struggle and new proposed legislation directed at chain store taxes. Eventually, the Robinson-Patman Act of 1936 was enacted to curb some of the very volume discounts A&P was using in its operations. A&P transformed its image over time from the hailed innovator to the retail giant that was squeezing the little guy. During this time, the zenith of power and influence and the inception of long-term challenges faced by the A&P occurred. The scrutiny that the company faced after 1930 defined its very public personality even as the expansion continued during the years of 1930 and 1940. Competitors were in adaptive phases, the lawmakers were on the offensive, and consumer expectations were beginning to change. The same characteristics that had enhanced the unstoppable growth of A&P, namely sheer size, well-oiled standardization, and low prices, now became the textbook. Examples of what impeded its agility in facing change. The mid-20th century dominance of A&P constituted a retail revolution that altered the grocery business in ways still felt today. The fight against chain store taxation. A&P's rapid ascent to grocery dominance in the early 20th century didn't go unnoticed, especially by smaller independent grocers who found themselves unable to compete with the chain's low prices and vast economies of scale, as A&P captured more market share, eventually accounting for 1 in every 10 grocery dollars spent in the U.S. by 1930. It triggered growing political scrutiny. This culminated in a wave of anti-chain store sentiment during the 1930s, driven by fears that such dominance threatened local businesses and consumer choice. Texas. Congressman Wright Patman led the charge, introducing legislation to impose special taxes on chain stores, targeting giants like A&P that thrived through bulk purchasing and deep discounts. The most significant legislative response came with the Robinson-Patman Act of 1936, which aimed to curb price discrimination by preventing large companies from receiving preferential pricing from suppliers. This act directly targeted one of A&P's key advantages, its ability to negotiate volume discounts that small grocers couldn't access. Though the law was framed as a way to promote fair competition, it posed a serious threat to A&P's business model, which relied on passing those supplier savings along to consumers in the form of lower prices. Thus began a multifaceted campaign to protect its interests by A&P, an experienced Washington lobbyist was brought on board, and to the utter amazement of the disquieted Union forces. Opposed to A&P, the company openly backed the unionization efforts of the American Federation of Labor. In lesser degrees, the Hartford brothers, who were then A&P's leaders, won favor with the public through an open letter asserting that taxing chain stores, such as A&P, would, as a consequence, increase food prices and directly injure those working-class families who depended on inexpensive groceries. The appeal of this message was the strongest during the nadir of the Great Depression, when every nickel was significant to a struggling household. Political pressure never bore fruit, a little too late for some of those concerned to effectively kick off the proposed taxes against chain stores. The Robinson-Patman Act was good on paper, but its enforcement became a moot point with time, while A&P largely circumvented the more injurious alternatives on the legislative battlefield. Yet A&P's war was a testimony that it had arrived at the center, not just of merchant activity, but of a larger discourse on capitalism, consumer welfare, and corporate power. While A&P claimed to be acting on behalf of the American shopper, it became clear that these impediments could easily be manipulated by political forces. Hence, its subsequent strategy became increasingly cautious and on the defensive, thus heralding a new phase for the retailer. Reinvention in the 20th century. A&P's transformation in the early 20th century was nothing short of revolutionary. Originally founded as a tea and coffee merchant in the 1850s, the company gradually evolved to meet the expanding needs of American households. By the 1920s, A&P had transitioned into a full-line grocery retailer, offering not just dry goods, but also fresh meat, dairy, and produce, a shift that marked the birth of the modern supermarket concept. Its strategy was built on vertical integration, controlling everything from product sourcing and packaging to retail distribution. This model allowed A&P to keep prices low and quality consistent, making it a trusted name for millions of American families. The company's scale during this period was staggering. By 1925, A&P operated nearly 14,000 stores, and by 1930, that number had grown to over 16,000. It became the largest retailer in the world, with sales reaching $2.9 billion, an astronomical figure at the time. A&P wasn't just a store. It was a retail empire that helped standardize grocery shopping across the country. With the innovations like branded teas, mail order services, and premiums for frequent shoppers, A&P shaped American consumer culture. Its stores became a fixture in communities nationwide, symbolizing both convenience and value in an increasingly urbanized society. Yet, even in its golden time, the roots of future challenges are growing. A&P's tightly controlled operations and rigid corporate hierarchy, which in another day were its strengths, turned into liabilities when the retail environment began evolving. Cost savings came with scaling, but they required an extremely slow, less responsive decision-making structure. The Hartford brothers were inherited from co-founder George Gilman and were quite wary about debt and innovation. This mindset of conservatism made it through the Great Depression, but stunted creativity in the decades that followed, particularly as the forms of consumer tastes and retail began changing. As competitors began to experiment with new store layouts, sales strategies, and localized product offerings, A&P remained committed to its original formula. It worked quite well in a homogeneous, price-sensitive marketplace, but the post-war boom ushered in increased demand for convenience, variety, and customization. Once ahead of the curve, A&P now found itself more in a reactive than a proactive mode. The very systems that allowed it to become a pioneer in retail were now difficult to modify in the face of a more fragmented and fast-changing market. Such rigidities would eventually impede its capability to compete in the fast-moving grocery environment towards the end of the 20th century and beyond. But as the grocery world picked up speed, A&P's once revolutionary formula began to quietly slip out of sync. The cracks begin to show. As the 21st century unfolded, consumer habits in grocery shopping began shifting rapidly. Shoppers were no longer just looking for low prices and convenience. They wanted variety, freshness, ethical sourcing, and products that aligned with their personal values and health goals. Chains like Whole Foods capitalized on the organic and wellness trend, offering premium produce, plant-based items, and allergen-friendly alternatives. Trader Joe's built a loyal following. With curated private label offerings and a boutique shopping experience. Walmart began, expanding into organic and fresh food categories to meet growing consumer demand. Meanwhile, A&P remained entrenched in a mid-20th century model that prioritized cost efficiency over customer experience. According to the Yahoo article, A&P failed to capture the lifestyle-focused shopper, missing major retail shifts that were reshaping the grocery industry. While consumers embraced gluten-free, organic, and gourmet options, A&P's shelves remained largely filled with traditional, packaged goods. Competitors were refreshing their store layouts, adding amenities like in-store wine shops, salad bars, and artisanal bakery sections. A&P, by contrast, neglected its aging stores, many of which appeared outdated and uninviting. The company's failure to modernize left it increasingly irrelevant to younger, more discerning shoppers who were seeking an experience. Something A&P never quite offered. It was beyond the complete assortment of goods, all into the technology A&P's competitors like in loyalty apps, digital coupons, and data-driven inventory management. A&P lagged behind in all aspects. The birth of e-commerce in grocery, creating an effective omni-channel strategy, and not even growing up, as emerging grocers have, by developing local tastes in the offerings. Consumers no longer shop in just one store, no more loyal shoppers. Now, find the best mix of value, specialty item, and atmosphere. This was their search. Like the one general approach, that a minimum investment in customer engagement strategies from A&P has again become less and less effective in this increasingly fragmented marketplace. In the long term, A&P's rejection, or perhaps just inability to innovate, imprinted its vulnerability to the industry giants, as well as to the niche players that understood consumer behavior most. Chains like the Fresh Market and Aldi carved such strong identities, targeted assortments, and distinct market positions from A&P that it got stuck in the middle, not cheap enough to race on price, and not specialized enough to win on experience. The cracks that had formed for many years widened into fatal gaps, and by the time leadership attempted to course correct, it was already too late. The consumer had moved on, and A&P, once an epitome of American retail strength, found itself left behind. Walmart's game-changing entry. By the early 2000s, Walmart had become a disruptive force in the grocery industry, fundamentally reshaping how Americans shopped for food. Its strategy was both simple and incredibly effective. Offer groceries at razor-thin margins to draw in customers, then profit from higher-margin items like electronics, clothing, and home goods. This cross-subsidized model gave Walmart a massive pricing advantage over traditional grocers like A&P, which relied almost entirely on food sales for revenue. As Walmart expanded its supercenter format, shoppers were increasingly drawn to the convenience of one-stop shopping, something A&P could neither match in scope nor scale. A&P's business model, which had once thrived on being a neighborhood staple with competitive prices and reliable offerings, began to crumble under Walmart's pressure. The script notes that even in A&P's core Northeast markets, where Walmart's fresh food penetration was relatively weak, the tide was shifting. Shoppers were still buying produce and deli items from local grocers, but the gravitational pull of Walmart's pricing and breadth of products was undeniable. Over time, consumers began to split their grocery trips, buying staples like cereal, paper goods, and canned foods at Walmart, while reserving perishable purchases for traditional supermarkets. This shift eroded A&P's core revenue streams. Unlike A&P, Walmart can operate on little to no profit on any food item because selling high was practically more than enough to cover expenses for their other items because of sheer volume and a very diversified product portfolio. The Yahoo article mentioned how Walmart's operational efficiencies and logistics network delivered a matchless cost advantage. Meanwhile, A&P, burdened with outdated infrastructure and heavy overhead, with little innovation, struggled to keep up. There was no capital available at A&P's disposal to invest in modernization in-store or upgrading supply chains at the required pace. While Walmart is adopting data analytics and inventory optimization, not to mention negotiating aggressively with suppliers, A&P is still stuck in the past, squeezing margin out of vendors in an increasingly commoditized market. Walmart not only strengthened competition, it practically exposed the inherent weaknesses of A&P. As consumers got accustomed to low prices, wide selection, and convenience, A&P's value proposition became obsolete. Even attempts at reinvention, such as the acquisitions of Pathmark and selective store remodeling, were too little, too late to counter Walmart. The big box model was simply unbeatable against the mid-size grocery competitors that A&P embodied: grocery companies that had no other diversification. Their very inability to innovate and scale in a Walmart dominated environment was not just a hindrance, it became the death knell. The last gamble. In 2007, A&P made what would become its final major strategic move, acquiring Pathmark for $1.4 billion. The deal was ambitious and aimed to re-establish A&P's dominance in the fiercely competitive New York metro area. At the time, it positioned A&P as the largest supermarket operator in the region, a title it hadn't held in years. The acquisition significantly expanded A&P's footprint and brought in Pathmark's working-class customer base, which was particularly strong in urban and suburban neighborhoods. The move was touted as a turning point that could help A&P regain relevance in an increasingly consolidated and cost-driven grocery landscape. However, the deal came with immediate complications. Due to antitrust concerns, the Federal Trade Commission, FTC, required A&P to sell off multiple Pathmark and Waldbaum stores, particularly in Long Island and Staten Island, where the merged company would have otherwise held a disproportionate market share. This regulatory interference not only diluted the benefits of the acquisition, but also signaled how fragile A&P's competitive advantage had become. The forced divestitures reduced the overall synergies A&P hoped to gain and strained the operational logistics of integrating Pathmark's stores into its already struggling network. The Pathmark acquisition was a huge financial gamble. A&P had borrowed quite a sum to close. The deal and the gamble left it exposed financially in the wake of an unstable period facing the grocery world. The merger turned out to be even more difficult than anticipated in terms of integrating Pathmark's systems, supply chains, and workforces. Instead of delivering more profit and greater market share, Pathmark's remnant customer base failed to provide A&P with the requisite catalyst for growth. Pathmark's dwindling appeal coincided with the migration of consumer preference towards niche and discount grocers. Instead of solving A&P's problems, the acquisition simply aggravated the problems already in existence. This was apparent by 2010 when A&P filed for bankruptcy only 3 years after the acquisition. That Pathmark was more of a burden than a blessing. What was meant to be a strategic leap Forward became instead a testimony of A&P's failure to read the signs of the market and its failure to read the signs of its own capabilities. The Yahoo article goes on to highlight the fact that A&P continued to shrink after the acquisition. It closed stores and lost further ground in the key markets. With hindsight, it could be said that the Pathmark acquisition was not just a bad investment, but an ill-fated attempt by the company to restore its former glory in a retail environment that A&P no longer understood. The slow fade. Following its initial bankruptcy in 2010, A&P attempted to stage a comeback. After restructuring and securing new ownership, the company re-emerged from bankruptcy in 2012 as a private entity, with Sam Martin brought in as CEO to lead a 5-step turnaround plan. The strategy focused on cutting unprofitable stores, improving customer value, and revitalizing the in-store experience. 4. A brief period, A&P showed signs of recovery, posting modest profits in 2013 and 2014 for the first time in years. However, the gains were shallow, and the deeper structural issues remained unresolved. The retail landscape had changed faster than A&P could adapt, and competitors had already moved well ahead in efficiency, innovation, and customer engagement. By 2015, A&P's financial situation had once again deteriorated. The company filed for Chapter 11, bankruptcy for a second time, unable to keep up with its debt obligations and sagging sales. This time, there would be no revival. According to the Yahoo article, A&P began shuttering or selling off its remaining 296 stores, including familiar names like Pathmark, Waldbaum's, Food Emporium, and Superfresh. Many of these locations were acquired by other chains such as Stop and Shop, Acme Markets, and Key Food, while others were simply closed. The move effectively marked the end of A&P's presence in the American grocery industry. This final collapse was caused by a number of factors. A&P stores were antiquated, uninspired, and frequently out of step with the expectations of contemporary consumers as a result of years of underinvestment. A&P stayed mired in a cycle of cost-cutting, attempting to preserve profitability. By streamlining operations rather than innovating, rather than updating infrastructure or implementing new retail technologies. In the meantime, its market share was further reduced by growing competition from big box and discount grocers like Walmart and Aldi. A&P was losing ground to more nimble and well-funded rivals, even in its core Northeast markets, where it had previously held a dominant position. Once a national retail icon, now a fading memory. A&P's demise came under pressure of economics and strategic inertia. Its second bankruptcy and closure of stores in 2015 indicated the extent of the fall for the company, defined by opening a peak of 16,000 stores in the early 20th century to zero. Its legacy chains were dismantled and absorbed, while long ago vacated was its historic headquarters, while other grocers were evolving and expanding into an omni-channel. Experience A&P's failed to carve out its place in the contemporary marketplace by the end. Their slow fade stood as a harsh reminder to even century-old giants that they can disappear when failing to change with the times. The struggles of A&P were thus a microcosm of a slow-moving dissolution of brand loyalty into experience-based decision-making in the retail sector. As retail, consultant Bert Flickinger said in a 2015 interview, shoppers no longer stick with a name, they Stick with whoever understands their lifestyle, something A&P did not adhere to as customer. Expectations accelerated beyond its antiquated delivery model. A&P may have vanished from storefronts, but its story didn't end there. Legacy lost. A&P's collapse is a powerful example of what happens when a dominant brand fails to evolve. Alongside its customers, once the undisputed leader in American grocery retail, operating over 16,000 stores at its peak and controlling a quarter of market share in its regions, A&P became a relic of the past as the retail landscape changed. While competitors embraced data-driven insights and consumer-centric strategies, A&P remained focused on squeezing margins from suppliers, a short-term tactic that neglected customer experience and long-term loyalty. Instead of asking, "What do our shoppers want?" the company doubled down on a vendor-first mindset, which ultimately left it blind to shifting cultural and retail trends. As consumer expectations evolved, A&P's outdated approach to store design and product selection stood in stark contrast to emerging competitors like Whole Foods, Trader Joe's, and even Walmart. According to the Yahoo article, A&P failed to modernize and ignored changing shopping habits, especially among younger, health-conscious buyers. It stuck to mass-produced staples while rivals embraced organic, local, and specialty foods. Chains that once lagged behind. A&P were now offering wine bars, curated snack aisles, and digital integrations, while many A&P locations looked unchanged from the 1990s. These aging stores lacked both aesthetic appeal and the experiential draw that modern grocery shoppers were beginning to expect. The last years of the company were spent attempting reinvention and suffering through miscalculated strategic initiatives. The 2007 acquisition of Pathmark was aimed at bolstering A&P's regional dominance, but instead landed the company with inconceivable debt and political awkwardness in post-acquisition integration. Although A&P returned to bankruptcy, thanks to a 5-point turnaround plan devised by the newly appointed CEO, Mr. Sam Martin, which helped briefly pull the company out of bankruptcy in 2012, the turnaround was simply too late. The retailer was out of date and overpriced by the time sales-stealing behemoths such as Walmart, Aldi, and Costco perfected low-cost, high-efficiency models embraced by consumers. In the end, A&P's downfall illustrates a more general reality of contemporary retail. Even icons must change or face becoming obsolete. Its demise was assured by its inability to make investments in the in-store experience, meet specialized customer needs, and establish an adaptable, omni-channel presence. A&P stuck to outdated methods that used to make it great, but were unable to maintain it in a rapidly changing, digitally connected grocery market, as mentioned in both the script and the Yahoo article. A&P's demise was caused by a series of lost opportunities, rather than a single choice in a society that values creativity and consumer insight. Its tale serves as a cautionary tale for any legacy brand that believes that its past success ensures its continued existence. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive into A&P's rise and fall, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories behind the brands you thought you knew. Got thoughts or memories of shopping at A&P? Drop them in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're curious about more retail legends, click on the next video showing on your screen now. See you there!